Отже,
Уважаемые коллеги, продолжаем наш рабочий день. Сейчас мы будем... We are continuing our briefing session. We will speak now about Ukraine-NATO, the true story of military cooperation. We'll hear General Mayor and Marcin Koziel from the NATO Liaison office in Ukraine. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this possibility to inform you about military cooperation between armed forces of Ukraine with NATO. I'd like to specify that the cancellation of bloc-free status by Ukraine in last year was really aimed at the future potential of development of our country as an equal partner of international community, also in the areas of security, safety and stability. The end aim of that is to create conditions for fully fledged European integration of Ukraine in Euro-Atlantic environment. The Ukrainian military forces since 1994 have been quite actively cooperating with the NATO and its military structures in a variety of areas. Our previous priorities were the collaboration in mutual compatibility and training of military forces, participation in crisis managing, mitigating missions with involvement of NATO member countries, and now we reshuffle our cooperation to favor more military operational capacities with the view of expanding again the potential of our military forces in the to withstand aggression, particularly in the east of Ukraine. The second priority of our cooperation is further transformation of the safety and security sector in Ukraine to meet Euro-Atlantic standards. In short-term perspective, our key priorities will be building up the potential of military forces in Ukraine, reaching maximum compatibility with NATO, improve military cooperation and better Ukraine's involvement in international security measures, and for that purpose we use all bunch of mechanisms and tools available in our cooperation with the nation. First of all, this is about the Ukraine-NATO Commission that operates at the highest level of the prime ministers and ministries of defense of Ukraine and NATO member countries. Joint work group between Ukraine and NATO on military reform and on many other matters. It also involves Ukrainian military forces participation in a variety of NATO exercises to enhance operational capacities of the Ukrainian military, and that provide for the certification of our military forces according to check for their compliance with NATO standards. One of specific examples concerns the list of our detachments that we prepared according to NATO standards, and some years ago we had no financial, organizational, other capacities to build our detachment in full compliance with NATO standards. This is why we came up with a list of individual detachments that we intended to use for international crisis management. One of these detachments was 95 Airborne Brigade based in Zhytomyr, and already last summer this detachment was prepared according to NATO standards, and it did show excellent results throughout their engagement in this military conflict, they had a deeply penetrating raid into the rear of our enemies. And the hero of Ukraine was the decoration that the chief commander of this brigade received. I'm deeply confident that introducing NATO standards will greatly enhance the capacities of our Ukrainian military. For 2015, participation and involvement of Ukrainian servicemen in 27 big exercises with NATO have been envisaged, and these measures tackle some specific direction. First, development of commanding and communication system, logistics, military medicine, information and psychological ops, preparation of diffusing specialists also able to deal with IAD, and cyber security matters. For this year,
the provision is for the participation of the armed forces of Ukraine in 12 multinational exercises, 5 on the territory of Ukraine, the rest beyond the boundaries of Ukraine, and also 7 international exercises of the command headquarters, where not the units but just headquarter officers will be involved. Also in 2015 we plan to involve about 3,000 servicemen, about 25 aircraft, about 10 vessels, ships, and about 100 military equipment units. And I would like to note here that great impetus in the cooperation between Ukraine and NATO was given by the Wales summit, which took place in September last year. By the decision of the summit, we set up the 5 trust funds, which have to contribute to the development of the armed forces of Ukraine along those lines which I have mentioned above. First of all, the practical implementation of the system of procurement and logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine. Number 2, the trust fund to improve the system of communication and automation of the armed forces of Ukraine. The third trust fund to create the system of retraining and social adjustment and adaptation of servicemen and rehabilitation of those wounded in the course of the entire terrorist operation. The trust fund on physical rehabilitation and providing the processes for the military men. In the fifth, the trust fund dedicated to the realm of cyber defense and protection. Very vital today remains to be the issue of international material and technical assistance and individual and collective specialized training of the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. We appreciate the member states of NATO for the assistance provided to us. I might say that today, all in all, we received the free material and technical assistance to the tune of about $260 million. Perhaps some of you eyewitnessed the day before yesterday another batch of the night vision instant tools was delivered to Ukraine. Today, the plane of the air forces of Germany left for Germany, carrying 17 wounded servicemen of Ukraine for rehabilitation and treatment. Perhaps I should stop at this point of time and give the floor to the head of the Liaison Office, NATO Liaison Office. I would like to thank him very much for the fact that he found the slot in his busy schedule to participate in this very important event. And then I'll be prepared to answer your questions. I would like to note, though, that any statements regarding the let's say the lack of the cooperation between Ukraine and NATO, they have no grounds, they are not grounded. And speaking about our discussion regarding the cooperation with NATO and in the Facebook, at the same time I would like to say that the armed forces of Ukraine remain open for the discussion with the civil society regarding the above mentioned issues. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen. I believe that General already very specifically mentioned what we are doing together with Ukraine today and what the priorities are and the focus of our attention today. This is really so. We can say that under this today's available situation, there are three key modules or blocks of our support. First, complete political support to be given to Ukraine from NATO, from member states of NATO in the context of our today's security situation and what is going on in the east of this country. And the second very practical step, or practical initiative, is as follows: what was mentioned by General regarding the existence of the trust funds, which the major objective, which is the long-term transformation of the armed forces of Ukraine based on the NATO standards. And the third key issue is the support given to Ukraine today in the practical sense of that, is our preparedness to propose the consultation and the advice aid to Ukraine regarding the formation of the armed forces of Ukraine and other elements of the security sector of Ukraine. Here I would like to emphasize the very important, big importance on the part of the advisors of the NATO countries in my office, which I am privileged to be head of. The member states of NATO already has set up the expert, let's say, advisors group on different issues, the top-notch professionals, and their role here in Ukraine is to provide assistance to the government and the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces of Ukraine and other institutions of the Ukraine sector of security to help reform the security sector in Ukraine based on Euro-Atlantic standards. I would like to say that the majority of those projects we are talking today about, they have a long-term nature. Long-term nature, and the reforming of the armed forces is the process that is very complex, and we cannot expect very quick results. And each country, not only in such country as Ukraine, where we face really big challenges, the reform associated with the fact that the government of Ukraine has at the same time to reform the security sector as well as to efficiently respond to the available security situation in the east of Ukraine. We do realize that this is a big challenge, a challenge which would be the big one in any other country, not only in Ukraine. And we have to understand that all those projects which we are implementing now in Ukraine, the majority of those bear a long-term nature. As regards the challenges, they do exist. The majority of those challenges is of kind of technological, the engineering nature, and those are not the challenges which we cannot, let's say, resolve or overcome by joining our efforts. I would like to inform you that NATO at all the levels is working together with the government of Ukraine, with the president of Ukraine, with the parliament, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, but also with the volunteers of different kind. I would like to emphasize here the great significance and the importance of the volunteer initiatives, and we are working on all the levels in order to jointly resolve all the outstanding challenges and problems which can block different aspects of our cooperation. Once again, I would like to emphasize that those challenges the majority of those challenges are of the technological nature, and they are not those challenges which we cannot take care of or overcome together. We are going to resolve all those outstanding issues, and once again, thank you very much for your invitation extended to me.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions from the audience? 1+1 TV channel, Evgeny Agarkov, you mentioned training routines. Could you provide more detail? What type of training you meant, and what disciplines, if any, and who will teach our troops actually? What kind of discipline they bring in, whether it be armament or weapon or some gadgets of sorts. So any details about that training for each of the exercise or training courses you have envisaged? I'd like to underscore it that we have military exercise approved as a list by the parliament within the meaning of the law on the admittance of military detachment on the territory of Ukraine. And there are individual trainings of Ukrainian military servicemen using mobile training groups from NATO member states. Speaking of the exercises to be held within the scope of a series of trainings and exercises, we are going to have 5 exercises on the territory of Ukraine, like the Sea Breeze, Rapid Trident, Safe Sky, Law Enforcement 2015, and Fearless Guardian for the National Guard. This will be held on the territory of Ukraine. Beyond Ukraine, our detachments will take part in 7 exercises for training groups of military police, the sea combat endeavor, the Maple Arc, Common Challenge, and Trident Junction. As concerns individual training, if you want, of our military servicemen, the detachments by instructors from NATO member countries. We already have it here and now. We have mobile training groups deployed that hail from the UK. We have a train and equip program when a whole detachment is being trained. And the country that delivers that training also provide necessary equipment for that. At the moment, we can speak about medical equipment, individual protection measures, and communication devices. We do not speak about any military weapon, say, or lethal, as we call it now, lethal weapons at the moment. Those measures and methods that we used, these also up to uniforms. Well, but you've mentioned some sea and air training, whether NATO will bring in some vessels or, well, for example, if we take Sea Breeze exercise that we have been having for the past 15 years in the Black Sea, it will be in Odessa, and we expect 9 vessels from the Ukrainian Navy, and there will be up to 500 personnel, 6 vessels, several submarines, choppers, and related equipment from NATO partner countries. But this is not to say that the parliament allowed this equipment and personnel on the territory of Ukraine. It's just for exercise purpose. Any lethal exercises, any air exercises, well, there will be Safe Sky exercise together with Poland. There will be several blocks of it carried out using the available air network. There will be up to 100 personnel and 8 planes from the Polish side, and 250 personnel and up to 10 planes and 1 chopper from the Ukrainian side. You also mentioned that no lethal weapons are on the table for discussion. Do you know of any erections in the NATO states as regards the possibility, in principle, of providing Ukraine with such lethal weapons aid? Maybe your colleague may reply to this. I will respond by saying that this is more political rather than military issue. When we discuss the issue with our military colleagues, they do understand the situation. And you do know of heated discussions held even in the US, at the highest level in the US, regarding that matter. But from what I understand, and this is my personal opinion, that politicians want to give one yet chance for peace. Maybe Mr. Martin would add something to it. I'm sorry, but I may not comment on the bilateral discussions held at that highest level, because this is about discussions between Ukraine and NATO member states. I can only comment on alliance matters. Next question, please. Interfax Ukraine dзвінок Pogrebennik. I have a question regarding the advisory group. What's the membership, the number of members, and have they already arrived and been deployed in Ukraine to start the work here? At the moment, we have 8 advisors working in Ukraine. These were nominated by NATO member states to work on a variety of issues, including the defense policy, defense planning, logistics, general command management of the military, collaboration with the National Security and Defense Council, professional training and upgrade qualification of military servicemen and civil employees of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. So yeah, the group is already deployed in Ukraine and working. They come on different dates. The first advisors came already in the past year. The advisors work on a permanent basis in Ukraine and work within the scope of the trust fund we already mentioned. Also beyond the NATO, the aegis of NATO, we have the so-called mobile training teams deployed by individual NATO member states to deliver short-term training courses for individual servicemen and their detachments. So this is a multifaceted issue and question that the number of advisors here regularly changes, but mostly I just wanted to add to what my colleague mentioned.
This is really a situation which was described by General, and once again we have today we have 8 advisors appointed to work here in Ukraine with the specific, to take care of specific issues. Doesn't mean that it exhausts what we can offer to you. We can offer as an alliance or initiate through the alliance some kind of the advisory assistance regarding all the aspects of the defense and security reform. Also, we can provide assistance in such important spheres of the activities of the government of Ukraine as the reforming the defense complex of Ukraine. NATO has a huge number of different possibilities and opportunities which we can make use of through workshops, seminars, meetings, let's say negotiations, etc., etc. We need just to have an input from the Ukrainian side what you use. I have the question to General. You mentioned that in the short-term perspective, Ukraine will make provision for entering or joining the international security space. My question is it possible today to come up with the agenda regarding strategic partnership between Ukraine and USA, which was signed in 2009? Also, to Mr. Marcin, I have the question. What do you think will further... Okay. What's going on today in the East, will it contribute to more fruitful cooperation between Ukraine and NATO? because there is but the possibility that this will expand to the Baltic states or any further. So if you're talking about the issues of the reform of national security of the Ukraine system, which is being prepared now, and those people who are writing about this kind of concept of security concept, are they going to stay and come up with their new proposals? So you are going to involve some other persons new persons who are going to work on this strategy. The people who adopted under Yanukovych this security concept, they work now today in the government of Ukraine. Still work. Is it a problem or not? Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that the complete accession to the Euro-Atlantic security environment is not a short-term perspective. It's a long-term one, and I don't believe that anybody can actually come up with some certain term or date. And this question should not address to the military guys, because we do not resolve such issues. As regards your question regarding the United States, indeed, the United States is a strategic partner of Ukraine, and the biggest assistance on the part of Ukraine is provided to the armed forces of Ukraine, both financial and the material technical products. In this specific case, we are talking about non-lethal weapons, and of course they provide a lot of assistance in training of the armed forces, which is very critically important today.
As regards prospects of cooperation with the view of the conflict in the East, I can only express my own personal opinion. A hybrid war is a huge challenge for all of us, not just for Ukraine. This is a challenge of the Euro-Atlantic scale, if you want. And I would also like to repeat that this is my personal opinion, not the position of NATO diplomat working in Ukraine. Speaking of cooperation between Ukraine and the NATO and Ukrainian experience accumulated with a view of what's happening in the East, Ukraine now has huge experience in reacting to this hybrid war, and we need to use and learn from that experience, not just to boost the security sector in Ukraine, but also to share this valuable experience with NATO member states as well. Because again, personally speaking, the hybrid war that Ukraine faces now, it's a huge challenge, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole Euro-Atlantic region, and we see a huge potential that Ukraine currently has in terms of being able to offer this experience to the NATO and other international community members. And actually we already do it. We've organized a number of conferences, meetings, say with the National Institute of Strategic Research. During these events, we discussed the experience of Ukraine and that of the NATO member states in dealing with new forms of war actions in 21st century. As concerns personal related matters, I'm sorry, but I'm not in a position to comment on that, because I cannot tell you who should or should not work over strategic documents of Ukraine. I think this is decisions to be made by the president, the cabinet of ministers. There is huge cooperation, though, around new version of the national strategy of security strategy of Ukraine, and we have huge cooperation with NATO member states, and we've already given our suggestions as to how to improve this document. But regarding the personal policy, it's not my cup of tea. Thank you, colleagues. Any more questions?
Останнє дуже коротке запитання.
The last and very short question. Coordinator of the all Ukrainian movements for the saving of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. My question is how these agreements, Budapest agreements, will be complied with, because Ukraine did relinquish its nuclear armaments that it had without anything in return, and one of the members of this Budapest memorandum even became an aggressor against Ukraine. Thank you for this very strategic question indeed. Unfortunately, I may not comment on bilateral agreements or discussions around NATO member states. I can only comment NATO-related issues. I'm sorry for that. Then may we finalize our briefing. For now, thank you for this briefing. I do hope that cooperation between Ukraine and NATO will bring closer the end of this hybrid war. And let me remind you that we are going